maybe we should. I don't know whose idea it was to do the record together, but it just seemed like a natural thing to do, and it was kind of cool because like they were on the West Coast and we're in Northern England, and it was a
Oh,
cool.
Robbie's on Facebook from A State of Mind. He sent me some stuff 2 years ago.
Oh
Are you,
yeah.
are you still in touch with them, or?
No, but we did when we were, touring after we'd had the big album, I guess in the late 90s. He came to a show and we hadn't seen him for years. And I guess he was working for the National Forest, and he was really cool and it was really good to see him. And he was just like a really cool guy. And he just, oh, that's Robbie. And we're all like, 15 years older or whatever. But yeah, they did come visit England, in the 80s. So we'd met, after the record, we actually, met face to face. And then we went and played over on the West Coast in, I guess, 1990. We did a tour and we met them then.
Also, my favorite album from Chumbawamba is Never Mind the Ballads. Here's the rest of it. That came out in 1987. That was my favorite album. I want to ask you this because I was against I was against voting. Voting doesn't change anything. But in the 90s, my views kind of changed because there was all this Pete Wilson Proposition 187, get rid of the immigrants and this and that. But then at the same time, I saw films and saw documentaries on the whole civil rights movement in America. And I feel guilty when I don't vote for Proposition. So I voted stuff.
Yeah.
Because in America, I mean, England, you guys agree with that, but in America, Black people died and fought for civil rights movement. So what is your view on voting now? Is it still the same as never mind the ballots here?
Well, I went through a similar change to you. Probably, I've lived in the US for 13 years and I became a citizen maybe 6 years ago. And I voted in the 2016 election. Even though I hate Hillary Clinton, I thought we can't have Trump. So I voted against Trump. And it's interesting, in America, I vote in a lot of the local elections because it's like, you get a whole book of, propositions and things and like, oh, the fire service need more money or the school needs more money so you can vote on it. In England, you only ever vote for a politician in an election. And it's really different. And there's only 2 votes in my lifetime where people have voted on an issue rather than, an election, a general election for politicians or a local council election. And one was about joining Europe when I was a kid in the 1970s. And the other was Brexit. And that's the only 2 times the people have voted on an issue. And it's kind of crazy when I come here and there's all kind, it's like you get a booklet when there's an election, and you vote for all the state representatives and right up to the president. I voted for Bernie Sanders and I'm proud of that. I voted for him in 2016 in the primary, and I'm gutted that they it didn't surprise me that the Democratic establishment, kind of did everything they could to stop him. And I went to see him speak in Washington and it was amazing. There was like 17,000 people of all different kinds of people. And this is just, he is a guy, the only time I can really remember in my lifetime when a politician has actually, I felt like he's on the same page as us, he wants to help people.
I'm not a big fan or anything of Bernie, but I was very surprised and shocked that he was talking about all the important issues about Muslim community, people of color community, undocumented, on and on. But so I was just blown away. I go, wow, that's crazy. But okay, thank you for answering that question. Now to the funny part. This is about I read this old thing in an interview. You guys tricked Gary Bushell about some doing like a Oi side project band to be on his comp. How did that happen?
So basically, I don't know, we were just we were always pranksters. I call it pranksters. You know, we always like to have fun, you know, amongst ourselves, but we realized that you could fool people, you know, you could like, and it was again before the internet. So we just like, you know, made up a song, and it was all it was, you know, and it was, you know, Gary Bushell was like championing the oi music, which was, I mean, it's kind of, you know, it was like kind of lent towards skinhead music and not super progressive in any way, and almost, you know, almost lent towards the right wing, you know, back in the 1980s. So we wrote this song, and it was satire, and the lyrics were "I'm thick and I'm stupid," and it was just "I'm thick" 64 times in the song, and we recorded it, you know, like in a day or whatever, just in the basement, and sent him a cassette, and he said, "Oh, do you want to be on the next Oi album?" Because he was in this position where he you know, he wrote for Sounds, one of the mainstream music papers, and somehow he'd got himself, oh, you know, I can put music out by bands. And it was, you know, and we went to London for a day, you know, and recorded the song in an afternoon or whatever, got this contract, and it was an awful contract, but we were playing along, you know, because we were like pretending we were like stupid oi band. And basically he just made a shitload of money from it. You know, he got like, even though he didn't write a note of music, he got like a huge chunk of the royalties.
Since you guys did that, did Gary Bushell came after you guys or anything? Or he said any like?
But he was embarrassed that he'd been hoodwinked, that we'd like, you know, we'd kind of gone under the radar and made a fool of him, really.
Oh, he just got embarrassed. Okay, just wondering.
Yeah, we embarrassed him, so he didn't really want to go there because it would have just embarrassed him even more.
Right. Okay. Now, One Little Indian Records, which was correct me if I'm wrong, that record label is singer from Flux of Pink Indians label, right? Or is it guitarist label?
It did grow out of One Little Pink Flux of Pink Indians, but it was the bass player Derek.
Oh, it's Derek's label.
Yeah,
so
yeah. Derek.
One Little Indian record used to be really big. How did you guys get onto the One Little Indian Records?
Well, I think, you know, so when we started bringing records out, initially we had our own label, Agitprop, which grew out of the cassette label. Mm-hmm. We did like what they call then like a manufacturing and distribution deal. So you'd go to a record company and you'd be your own label, but they would press the records and distribute them to the cool record stores. And they'd take their cut and we'd get our cut. And so we did that with a northern record label. And then we did it with Southern Records, who did it for Crass. Mm-hmm. So we were having contact with, and then Derek was setting up Flux of Pink Indians. One Little Indian. And so we were kind of, we knew what he was doing and he was like going in a different direction. And then we got to a stage where we'd kind of fallen out with Southern, and I don't know how it came about, but it was like, yeah, do you want to be on One Little Indian? And we're like, yeah, that sounds really cool. So we did, and you know, we did like 2 albums, and then, you know, at the end of that, it was when we had the big album, which should have been on One Little Indian, but they were having real financial problems, so we just went and finished it on our own, and then kind of did around.
I saw you when you first came to America. Chumbawamba did it. I think that was 20 years ago, 1990, right?
Yeah.
Was that 30 or 20?
30 years ago.
Oh, 30 years ago, 1990.
Yeah, that first tour. Yeah.
What was that up with that big Elvis Presley banner? What was that about? The Elvis Presley banner.
So by 1990 we'd kind of evolved a little bit, and we'd kind of become obsessed. You know, we were like total punk rock and hardcore punk rock, and then we we realized that, you know, there were, I don't know, probably 7 of us in the band at that time. We realized we had all these other influences as well from when we were kids, like the Beatles or Elvis or whatever it was. And, you know, it was the time when Elvis impersonators, even in England, were like, it was a thing. You could go to a bar and see an Elvis impersonator, and it was like a whole kind of thing going on. And so we thought, all right, we'll have an Elvis impersonator in the band. And I made the Elvis suit, and I was the Elvis impersonator. And I, you know, and you know, and Elvis appeared in one of our songs, and it was right around that time, 1990, when we had that song. So we were in, I guess we were in Berkeley, and then this guy who'd come to one of the shows says, "Oh, I work in a print shop. I can make you a Elvis banner." And he made, we've never seen anything like it, you know, because print shops in America are probably a little bit ahead of the ones in England. And like the next day, it comes with this huge banner, which he'd just taken off a photograph, you know, and we're like, wow. And we used it in the shows.
I forgot his name, but I met the guy many years ago. The guy who put out the show. I didn't believe him at first, but he told me that he got in a motorcycle accident. He got a huge money or something, and he's going to Chumbawamba. Yes, I didn't believe it at first when he told us that. I didn't really take it seriously. I go, yeah, right.
He had a motorcycle accident and got a huge payout, and all he wanted to do was organize a tour for his favorite bands. So Chumbawamba, and he wanted to get Crass, but Crass weren't playing. But he got Eve Libertine, so we did, you know. And it's funny, he lives in Portland, and I saw him a few years ago, but he contacted me on Instagram like a month ago, not very long ago. I posted something, and I posted a poster actually, because that tour ended up in Seattle. And the venue in Seattle, it was called the Barricades, and now it's like a proper theater kind of venue. And I've played there since. And I have a girlfriend in Seattle, and she works at the other end of the block. So, and somebody posted the original poster, and I reposted it on Instagram. And Roger saw it, and he's going, "Oh my goodness, Danbert!" So yeah.
Was his name Roger? Yes.
Roger.
I haven't seen him since then. Last time I saw him on the show, that's like 30 years ago. And
yeah, he lived in Portland for a long time.
I kept watching. I saw your other shows. I saw you in Fairfax. I saw you in San Pedro show. The first Southern California show. Why did you guys stop when people were fighting? And you guys, I mean, no. The whole set was closed, and you guys ended early. Do you remember that?
Very vaguely. I mean, it's only happened a few times where we just, you know, if we were on stage and people were fighting and we couldn't, you know, we'd probably say something and say, look, you know, what's going on? And if we couldn't deal with it, if we couldn't like calm people down, then it's like, what's the point of playing if, you know, people are just, they've got some other agenda going on. And I know that, you know, for the people who are not fighting, who are there just to see the show, it's kind of a piss off. But it only happened a couple of times, actually, that.
Were you surprised when you played in Los Angeles because people were slam dancing to Chumbawamba?
I think that was a little bit, it was a cultural thing. We weren't, you know, we had a couple of incidents in England where, particularly one when we were on tour with Flux of Pink Indians in 1984, and these skinheads came, and Björk's band was playing Kukul from Iceland, and we were on this tour, we're having a great time, and these skinheads came, and there were like 10 skinheads and like 100 punk rockers, and basically, you know, these skinheads just came in and started fighting and basically trashed the whole show, and people went to hospital, including the drummer of Flux of Pink Indians. And after that, we were just like, you know, because we were like pacifists and anarcho peace, and we're like, after that, we're like, no, we can't let that happen again. You know, it only happened a couple of times where, and one time in particular in Memphis, I think it was.
Sorry, let me turn this off. It's my fault. Okay. Sorry. Okay. All right. So, okay.
And we were in Memphis in 1992, and this guy, you know, started like slam dancing and pushing people around and basically intimidating people, and nobody was doing anything. And so Alex jumped off stage and grabbed hold of him. We just followed her, and we just got the guy and we threw him out. And people were like, people applauded. They'd never seen anything. They'd never seen a band like deal with it. And we only had to deal with it on a handful of occasions because, you know, our music wasn't like super kind of hardcore thrash metal, whatever, which sometimes encourages, you know, slam dancing or whatever you want to call it. But you know, it was a revelation. It was like, yeah, this asshole's causing trouble, intimidating people, and you know, you can call it violence, but it was like minimum force. We got the guy and threw him out, and people were like, "Oh my goodness," you know. And that guy's a real asshole. People knew he was an asshole, and he was only there to cause trouble, and he, you know, people knew him for that. So, yeah.
You gotta excuse my camera. It's just getting all auto, like really front and back. You gotta excuse me.
Yeah.
I forgot to cancel that earlier because I don't want to end this thing and start over. When I saw you guys live for the first time, I was blown away. Each 3 or 4 songs, somebody would like dress up in a costume, like different costume. You guys were running back and forth from the stage. It was more like a theatrical, like theater. Where did you get all these ideas from?
I don't know. We just, you know, when we were like in our first high school band, we kind of did that, and it came from, there's an English band called the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, and they were very theatrical in the 1960s, and we just, you know, and then seeing Crass, who you know, the first time I went to a Crash show, it was in a venue I knew, but they transformed the venue with all the backdrops and the video, the TVs and the pamphlets and everything. And I think that kind of inspired us to think, oh, well, you can do a lot more with the stage than just be like 4 guys playing guitars and drums and bass or whatever. Mm-hmm. So we always thought, right, how can we, and it kind of evolved very slowly. But yeah, we did become very theatrical, and you know, that was one of my roles in the band, making costumes, wearing costumes, and making props, and it's so weird now. Now a few of us are involved in theatre, and we were never involved in theatre back then. But where I live in North Central Washington, in a small town, we have a community theatre, and I teach high school at the theatre. I teach theatre at the high school in our local town.
Oh, you teach theatre?
Yeah, just part-time. Well, I'm laid off now because all the schools are closed, but
you're also doing film, some kind of film project going on?
Say again?
Weren't you doing some kind of film?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I make little music videos for YouTube or whatever, but you know, there's some filmmakers around here, and they'd be like, "Oh, Danbert, come be in a film," you know, and I'm like, okay, you know, and it's kind of cool that people ask me to do that, and I have no training as an actor other than being in Chumbawamba, you know, being on stage in that way, but I have no formal training.
Danbert, also, correct me if I'm wrong, when Chumbawamba got big, didn't one of your members steal this album on live on the airs?
Yeah, so we I don't know, and it was Bill Mayer, you know, I think Bill Mayer, yeah, and before he were like he had a late night show, and Alice went on there, and you know, because we were like, you know, we can't, like I said, we lived in a squatted house, we had no money, we shoplifted occasionally food or supplies, so we had an empathy with the idea that, yeah, we're bringing out albums, and albums are expensive, and if you don't have any money and you want to hear the music, then sure, we don't care if you shoplift it. but it caused an absolute sting, you know, and like the record company were like, oh, you can't say that. And the record stores were like Virgin. I think because Alice said a couple of, you know, like the huge record stores like Virgin and HMV. So they were all upset. And of course, now everybody steals music from musicians and, you know, because it just gets streamed. So it's like the opposite. But
Danbert, this is going to be kind of funny. This is like in the 90s. I forgot what year it was, but this is when MTV was playing nothing but music, like music videos. Okay, that's
yeah,
back MTV was doing that. So it was in the 90s. I don't know what year it was, but Epitaph was getting big, so they were playing some pop punk bands and stuff. And I was just eating, enjoying myself, and eating, and I almost had a heart attack. I saw Chumbawamba. I was going, wow, what the fuck? But here's the thing. When I first saw it, it put a big smile on me. And I felt like, it's like adrenaline. I couldn't believe it. I thought you guys were gone. And I saw you on MTV, a music video. My jaw just dropped. I was like, wow, this is incredible. This is awesome. But, I mean, I know it go against some of the stuff you said in the past, but when I first saw it, I was going, wow, this is so cool. That was my reaction. So a few months later, in this fanzines and everything, everyone started writing this huge article, pages of Chumbawamba, this and that. Did a lot of your old fans go against you for doing that? And some of the bands you used to play with went against you as well?
So we had this thing, you know, we were like an underground band for 10 years, you know, the anarcho-punk scene in England, and we gradually branched out and started playing around Europe. And we still all had like part-time jobs or were in part-time school or whatever. And we decided after 10 years of being a band, 10 years, we said, we had a band meeting and we said, right, we got to either give up or do it properly, you know, do it full time. And we decided to try doing it full time. And so we got a booking agent. We had a really crap one for 6 months, but then we got one because we'd always booked our own shows. We got this really good booking agent, and we were playing like 120 shows a year in the early 90s. And that was when we signed with One Little Indian as well. So we were, and you know, they were a kind of a bigger independent record label, and they're going like, well, you have to make a music, you know, if you put in an album out, you know, we need to have a single and put a music video out. So we started making music videos, and gradually, I guess, you know, MTV picked up on them. So it was like, yeah, and it was insane because in those days it cost us more to make a music video than to make an album.
Wow, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, because of the technology.
You had to like hire a film crew, you know, like 10 people in a film crew or 8 people or however many, you know, for a day, and pay all the wages and everything. But now the technology has changed so much. You know, you can make a film of the same quality on your phone, you know, which is kind of what I do for my new music.
Sorry for bringing this up, but did you also saw that cassette tape? It was against Chumbawamba. It was from England a long time ago. It was against Chumbawamba. It was a compilation.
So the second part of that question, did we get you know, blowback from the fans? We not really. We got the most kind of reaction when we signed with a major label, because, you know, obviously in early days we were very anti major labels. So we were on tour, you know, in America, and we'd be in like Philadelphia, and some really angry punk rockers would show up, and we'd have this, you know, these arguments, and so yeah, there was a huge element of that, but it was more, yeah, because we were on a major label.
Okay, just wondering. And also, when you guys were doing shows, like more bigger show, I read an article that you poured a jug of water to the Deputy Prime Minister, John Prescott. You poured a jug of water. Is that true?
Yeah, well, it wasn't a jug; it was a huge bucket.
So bucket?
Yeah. So we had that big song, and it was, uh, you know, in 90, it was the British equivalent of the Grammy Awards. And
Okay.
the song had been voted by, people, radio listeners. There was a category for the biggest single voted by radio listeners, and we were one of the bands who were on the, you know, choice for that award. So we got invited, and we were like, well, we don't want to go. It's, music business bullshit. And the record company said, oh, well, they give you this huge budget, you can make a film. So we made this film, to play while we were playing. So it was behind us. And it was like the Occupy the Streets movement, the protests, what were going on in England at the time. We changed the words to the song because the dock workers were on strike in England. We thought, right, yeah, we were on mainstream TV. We've made a political point. But we were there at the actual night. We were there, and it's this huge arena. And as the night goes on, and they serve food and they bring you champagne and drinks and whatever. And everyone, as the night goes on and people are getting a bit more drunker or whatever it is, our bass player Paul goes, oh, John Prescott's there, who's the Deputy Prime Minister, which is like the Vice President of England. And he's like 10 tables away from where we are. And I was always the one in the band who I was the most easy to convince in any kind of dare. And like, well, what can we do? And oh, these big, huge buckets that had the champagne in, and it's just like ice water now, melting. Go throw it on him, Danbert. So I did, and Alice and Paul were behind him, and they actually probably got more water on him. But because I was in front of him, I jumped on his table and threw it on him. And I said, this is for the Liverpool dock workers, because his department was supposed to, he was supposed to be the working class guy in the government for Tony Blair, and he was a complete sellout. He'd sold out these striking dock workers, and so like, this is for the dock workers. Here, and it soaked him through and whatever. And it just so happened the photographer captured it, this politician, and there was no big news story the next day, so it was on front of all of the papers, and the 6 o'clock news and everything. And the press turned up at my parents'. They were on the doorstep at 7 a.m. the next morning, and we were like, the paparazzi were like, for like 3 or 4 days, we were like the anarcho crazy people.
You didn't go to jail for that, or they arrested you for that?
So what happened was I threw the water and I tried to run away, and I got probably like 50 yards, and the security, the plainclothes security, pounced on me and handcuffed me, and they're like, right, wait here. These two coppers were guarding me, and Buff came and like sat with me, and the head, I guess he'd be like what you'd call FBI, the head of the security operation. About an hour later, he came back and he's going like, we know you are, but Mr. Prescott, the Deputy Prime Minister, he doesn't want to press charges, but we know you are, so I don't think you've got away with it. But it would have just been more embarrassing for him to like, go to court. So we didn't know that's what would happen. It was just like a spontaneous thing, but so we kind of got away with it. But after that, obviously, we never got invited back to any of the big music events, which is cool, really, because we didn't desperately want to be there.
Also, some of your older fans don't know about this. When you were on major TV shows and everything, you were also doing fundraiser benefit at the same time. I read an article, you did a General Motors TV commercial, you donated the money to group or different organizations and stuff. I mean, how much money were you giving away to different groups and organizations at that time?
Yeah, it's funny, like if you have a song on an advert, and in those days, I think it were faxes, and we get a fax through and it'd say, all right, General Motors want to do an advert and they want to give you like $250,000. So you see that figure and you think, oh my goodness. But then like the publishing company take 20% and the management take 10%. So it's maybe like, it ends up being like 60% of $250,000, which is a shit lot of money for, they don't even have to get out of bed. They just do it, you know, they put it on there. And we like, you know, when the first one came through, I think it was an Italian car company. And we were like, no way, we're not selling out to corporations. And then somebody said, well, maybe what if we gave that money away? So we did it a few times. We could only afford to do it a few times because we had to have that amount of money in the bank, you know, and they don't pay you for like 6 months or a year after. So it's kind of a juggling act. And the one in Italy, we said like, right, we were playing at this squatted venue we'd played at for years, and they had a pirate radio station, and we said to them, look, if we do this advert, and we, you know, it was a lot less money, but it was like $20,000. If we do this advert, you know, it's a shit car company, but if we give you $20,000, would you accept it, knowing that it comes via us from this Renault car company? And they're like, yeah, that'll keep us going for 10 years, our pirate radio. So we did it, and they were happy, and we were happy. So we did it a few times, but we were always very careful to ask the people who we were donating to whether they, you know, they were okay with it. And so, you know, we could do it, I don't know, maybe for a period of 18 months, we did it a handful of times where we took a huge chunk of money and redirected it.
When you guys were getting Chumbawamba was getting a lot of money, did you at least keep it to yourself, the other bands, so you could get a house or anything like that? Because the reason I'm asking is, I've been reading a lot of the old anarcho bands did so many beneficial. As they get older, they're fucking poor and broke. So did you at least financially keep some money to yourself or anything like that?
Well, you know, it's funny because we'd been a band when we started making money properly. When we, you know, like I said, when we became a full-time touring band, we made a little bit of money from touring, and we sold a few more records, but none of us had kids or anything, so it was kind of cool. But, you know, it wasn't like a huge amount of money. But then we had that enormous song, and we did make money. And suddenly it's like, yeah, well, you know, we'd been a band. By that time, we'd been a band for 15 years. And it's like, yeah, I can afford to buy a house or whatever. You know, not like a mansion or anything, but just like a reasonable house. And like, so most of us did that. And I think because we were all in our 30s, we were older and wiser, you know, and we'd come into contact with bands, you know, when we were in that mainstream for that short period of time. Like, do you remember like Hanson, those brothers?
Yes.
Yeah, and they were like 3 teenage boys, and we happened to play this festival with them, and we were their dressing room was opposite ours, and they had this road manager or whatever, tour manager, and their life just sounded like absolute hell. You know, this guy just ruled them with an iron rod, and then you read a little bit later they're bankrupt, and like how would they bankrupt? They've had huge hit records, and it's because like a lot of those young bands who are in that world, they don't realize when the companies send you a limousine that you're actually paying for it. You know, the record company will claim it back. So it's very easy to burn through all that money that's coming in. And we were just a little bit more astute and wiser. And there were 8 people in the band, so that kind of mediated it as well. It meant that 8 people and our managers earned a living from the record for a few years, and we still get some royalties from it now, not enough to live on, but we were just a bit more sensible, I think.
So you have more control. You guys collectively have more control than the manager.
And because our managers were really clever as well, and we were just a little bit more wiser about it somehow, I think. Okay, and we didn't sign those contracts for the amount of money. We signed them for the amount of artistic control we could keep.
Oh wow, that's interesting.
Because we could have signed and got more money with a different record company, but we're like, no, they want this and they want that, and we still, you know, and we knew when we went on a major label, this is only going to last for a year or 2, and it probably lasted for 3 years, which kind of surprised us. But we just had fun with it, really.
That's cool. Also, I talked to you about this 10 years ago in Los Angeles. When you did that big TV shows, and you guys were playing, and in the middle of the chant, you started chanting, "We have to free Mumia Abu-Jamal. We gotta free Mumia Abu-Jamal." And American people saw that. But does Mumia Abu-Jamal know that you guys did that at all, or what?
I think he did. I think, because we did another show with Rage Against the Machine, and it was a bit for Mumia Abu-Jamal, and his lawyer was there. And both us and some of the bands there, and Beastie Boys, and as a result of that, it was the David Letterman show. And you can see it on YouTube. You just put like thumping David Letterman in there, and the TV people were outraged, because how it works is you go in the afternoon and you rehearse so the camera guys and the sound and the lighting can get it all. So we just did it straight. And then you do it and you film it. And it wasn't actually live, but it was like 2 hours before the show goes on TV. So we changed words, and they're like, shit. We kind of had them over a barrel, really, because they didn't have time to find anything to replace it with. So to their credit, they broadcast it, because they could have just, I don't know, stuck any old rubbish in there. But I guess they'd been advertising the fact that we were going to be on there. So, but after that, it was a huge shitstorm, and the Fraternal Order of Police, because Mumia Abu-Jamal was a 16-year-old kid accused of killing a copper, and he always denied it. Mm-hmm. And the Fraternal Order of Police were like blacklisting Chumbawamba and Rage Against the Machine, anyone who supported Mumia. Mm-hmm. I guess that was, that and the Deputy Prime Minister thing. You realize if you're in that world and you don't play by the rules, you don't get invited back. And very quickly, if you question the system in the mainstream media, and it's the same with Bernie Sanders, he questions capitalism. Capitalism's killing the planet, but the mainstream media won't acknowledge that, because that's how the rich people make money off everybody. And once you start, trying to unpick that and say, look, no, capitalism's killing the planet and it's a shit thing, we need to change, else we're fucked. They don't invite you back. You don't, or they just trash you. So, like I said, we kind of were in that world for probably 2 years or whatever, and we burnt all our bridges really quickly. But it was cool, because I don't know any other bands who've done that, the obvious example is like U2, who pretend to be like super cool, but they're friends with George W. Bush, who's like a war criminal, and that's fucked up. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, because back then I was living in Los Angeles in the 90s, and we would come up all the way up to Northern California for Mumia Abu-Jamal rally. There was like thousands of people, speakers. This is when the whole thing was so big. And everything just died out as the years went by. What the hell happened to the whole Free Mumia Abu-Jamal? It used to be like big concerts, rallies with thousands of people. What happened to the whole Mumia Abu-Jamal?
I don't know. It's one of those things where, it does get an energy about it, and maybe it only has a certain lifespan to keep. I mean, it did work in a sense, because he was on death row, and he's no longer on death row, but he's still in jail. He's been in jail since he's 16. And he writes books and does spoken word, and he's really cool. And he's still trying to, get a retrial, a proper retrial, a fair trial. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, for the people who are in prison, and the US is the worst country in the world for imprisoning people. I mean, I'm sure.
I also noticed in your website, you guys continue to put information about Mumia Abu-Jamal a while back. I looked at it and stuff. Wow. Yeah. On your Chumbawamba, that was really awesome. Because that's when the whole Free Mumia Abu-Jamal was just dying out and stuff. And you guys continue to do that and everything. So And I saw you 10 years ago in Los Angeles, at a bookstore. You were doing the book tour.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes. How come you didn't let punk rockers book your book tour? So, like, you could do it at a punk show or some kind of event. I'm just curious.
It's funny. I had an album coming out and a book, and they just, different channels, but they just happened to coincide. And my publisher, who's a friend in Southern Oregon, said, "Oh, I'll organize your book tour." And book tours are like, if you get 15 people at a book reading, you're doing well. But there's no, you don't get paid, you don't get expenses for your gas or anything. It's just like you're there to try and sell the book, to alert people to the fact. So she sent these book dates all down the West Coast, but there'd be like a reading like in San Francisco, and then there wouldn't be another one for like 3 days, somewhere else. And I live in Twisp, which is northern Washington, so it's like 1,200 miles to LA. So I drove down over 3 days, and I filled all the gaps in doing little kind of music shows. And I played guitar, and I realized, book readings, they can be so boring. So I'd always bring the guitar and play a couple of songs as well. I think I did that in LA.
You know how I found out is because of I was living walking distance from that bookstore.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's how I found out, because I was living walking distance. And then you recently sent me. Sorry, I have to tune in something right here. I have to do part 2 on the video on the Instagram, because after 1 hour it turns off.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I have my phone hooked up here. Because it's live on Instagram. This is part 2 now on Instagram. Okay, so all right. So you sent me the link to your new project, Mesmerica Expect Circus with Kira Wood. You sent me that.
Yeah.
Yes. I had a chance to listen to a few of the songs. I was very, very surprised. It did kind of like, that kind of sounded like that Chumbawamba style, but then you guys were talking in between songs, doing like a theater talking. It was interesting. Were you going for that Chumbawamba style on that, or what?
Not specifically, but I know what you mean. Of all my solo stuff, it's probably the most Chumbawamba-like, the music at least. And I met Kira. She lives in the town. She grew up in Twisp, where I live, rural Washington. And we met doing theatre. We met on stage, actually, doing theatre. And it came about kind of like a joke. She said, "Oh, do you need a backing singer?" And I'm going, "Yeah, actually, I do." And I've always loved having female voices. When I record, and Chumbawamba was like, maybe it's because, in Chumbawamba we had 3 women. And so I always, if I record my songs, for the last 10 years or more, I think, right, I got to get a band, even though I don't have a touring band. I got to get, just to use that soundscape, and make it as interesting as I can. And with this one, so me and Kira have been touring for a couple of years, just little tours, mostly around the Northwest. And so when it came time to do a record, but I also, we did these little bits of spoken word theatre, because she's an actor as well. And I wanted to somehow put that on a record.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
All right. Danbert, I got a text from my friend. My friend says he knows you. His name is Chris. He does indie media, and he does a radio show at KPFK 90.7 FM. And he has a question. He said, okay. He texted me, he said, ask him how they found the melodies for the old English Rebel song. How did they choose them too?
Okay, so we in the late 80s, we'd been doing like punk rock records, and we'd been getting kind of louder and angrier. And we just decided, the kind of jokers in the Chumbawamba, right, what can we do to really kind of, challenge our listeners or whatever, our fans, our audience? And we'd been, I guess we'd been kind of branching out and seeing, particularly Irish folk rebel musicians in England, and the whole thing with Ireland and Britain, the struggle was going on at the time, the Troubles or whatever as they called them. And a couple of us had been over to Ireland and seen the British military police, the British Army, in a town like we grew up in. And so we'd been listening to Irish rebel songs and Scottish rebel songs, and we're going like, why is there no English rebel songs? And as it turned out, there was, and we had to go research it. And in those days before the internet, so we had to go to like audio libraries and find these old records, or we started going to a couple of folk clubs and hearing songs that working class people in England had been singing for hundreds of years, and so we wanted to try and put it on a record.
Okay. A couple of days ago, I posted on my Facebook to see if anybody has questions. I'm going to read you off these questions. But before I go into these questions, I got to tell you something. I got so excited that I was going to do an interview with you. Our first 15 minutes of the interview did not get recorded because I forgot to press record. So the first 15 minutes of the record, which I'm going to upload on YouTube, is not in there because I was going, after 15 minutes went by, I was going, fuck, I forgot to press record because I got so excited interviewing you. Okay, so now this is from Facebook. Like I said earlier, I asked people what I should ask and stuff. This is from John Oliverio. I would like to ask, I know you were very adamant about Saunders being the hopeful. Now that's not going to happen. How do you feel about Biden and Saunders endorsing him?
So I understand why, the establishment basically, the Democrat establishment and the mainstream media and all the kind of oligarchs, the super rich people who've made so much money off of Trump's tax cuts and everything else. Bernie was like their mortal fear, So I understand how that establishment can rally round a candidate anyone will do basically, and Joe Biden is absolute shit. He probably is not mentally all there, and his record is awful, his political record, and he's like a bumbling idiot. But then you see like Trump on TV saying, oh, inject disinfectant, to try and get rid of COVID, and the GOP are so repealing while all this COVID-19 is going on. The EPA are just like, oh, okay, there's no more regulations for pollution. Pollute as much as you want. Nothing to do with COVID or what. And it actually makes it worse. If you live in a polluted neighborhood, your lungs are more compromised. So even though I hate Joe Biden, I think he's awful. I might end up voting for him just because Trump is so much more awful. And even if Biden just bumbles along, probably less people will die than if Trump gets 4 more years. And that is an awful choice to have to make in an election. And I hope that, Biden has a sexual abuse allegation against him. I hope that stops him, and I hope Bernie can come back into it. But I don't think they'll let him. But because everything Bernie said pretty much in this COVID-19, Medicare for all, we need it. We need we need more than a minimum wage. And, we need serious action on climate change. And, Trump obviously is doing the opposite. Biden pretending he's going to do it, but he's financed by big wealthy donors who, if Biden gets elected, they want to call in their favors. So, and it may be marginally better than Trump, but I don't think we'll see serious progressive change. Basically the establishment are like, yeah, we're just going to hunker down. And so what will have to happen, when climate extreme weather events, this summer, we're in the middle of the pandemic, And where I live, we get wildfires, and we're in wildfire season now. So if there's suddenly wildfires when, there's not enough masks for hospital workers, and the smoke is so bad you can't go outside. I mean, we're not going out much anyway, but it's going to be like two huge blows at the same time, and society will break down in a sense. I mean, it is doing already to a point. So the only way kind of to save the planet, which Bernie knew this as well, he knew if he got elected, they still wouldn't let him do a lot of things. And the only way that he could change things, in terms of law, was if people are in the streets. And we can't be in the streets at the moment because of social distancing or whatever. But in our lifetimes, I believe there will come a time where it will be a full-on kind of confrontation between, the oligarchy that's kind of ruled in United States for the last 40 years, both parties, and people who want to have a future, and for the children and the grandchildren. I have twins who are 20, and they're growing up in this world where every year it's got hotter since they've been born, so it's not like because Bernie's no longer on the ticket, all those people who supported him are going to go away. They're still suffering as a result of how things are, the status quo. So, yeah.
Next question is from Nico DB. Do you like oi polloi?
Do I like oi polloi?
Yes.
We played with them a few times back in the day, and they were friendly chaps. I mean, and then they were one of the bands, probably the only band actually. They recorded like an anti-Chumbawamba EP once when we'd signed to a major label. And I kind of understood that because we'd written songs about bands who we'd grown up with who signed to majors. And I think they came to a show one time, and we had a huge discussion with them about it. And we agreed to disagree, really. But yeah, I mean, I don't have any animosity towards them,
Okay. Next one is from JV. Ask him if he remembers Scum Dribbles from Mansfield, who used to support gig at the same gig as Chumbawamba. I think he'll laugh and remember them with funness. Also, I love this album, though I'm very tall, so please ask him, does God go to the toilet? Thank you. That's from JV.
I do. It's funny. This is funny because me and Kira Kira had never been out of the country, and we did a little tour last year in England, and we did some on the East Coast, and then we went to England and Holland, and we played in Nottingham, which is very near where Scum Dribblers were from. So back in the day, we'd play in Nottingham or Mansfield. I think that's where Scum Dribblers came from. And, and we were playing in Nottingham, me and Kira playing in Nottingham, and this guy came up to me and he says, "Oh, do you remember me?" And, I didn't, to be honest, I didn't remember. I didn't recognize him. And he said, "Oh, we played with you, blah, blah, blah." And my hearing's not very good, and I didn't hear what he said. And so and I think he was a little bit offended. But then later in the night, we got talking again. And he said, "Oh, I was in Scum Dribblers. Do you remember Scum Dribblers?" And I totally remember Scum Dribblers. And if you haven't seen someone for 30 years, they look pretty different. I used to have hair back then. But, if I'm playing a show and my name's on the poster or whatever, people realize who I am. But for me to sometimes realize people in the audience who were in bands back then, and I haven't seen them back then. But anyway, we had a little chat and it was cool. And they were just this really cool band because, it was like the anarcho-punk days, and most bands were like totally angry and, punk rock. And Scum Dribblers had a sense of humor, which they kind of stood out because of that. And Chumbawamba did as well. And not a lot of bands at that time did. And it's like, well, in real life, we have a sense of humor, but, you go on stage and you're suddenly all poor-faced and angry. But we wanted to let that, come over on stage, and they did as well. So yeah, they were cool.
Next one is from Joshua Rowe. Unreleased music, ? Unreleased music. What is that?
Oh, say again. I didn't get that.
Next one is from Joshua Rowe. Unreleased music, ? Unreleased music.
Unreleased music. Yeah, I'm not sure what do you mean. Yeah.
This one's from April Davis. What was it like having Eve from Crass touring with them in California? Her son is a friend of the band.
Say again.
April Davis. What was it like having Eve from Crass touring with them in California? Her son is a friend of the band.
Yeah, we did that tour. We were the whole West Coast really, from San Pedro up to Seattle. So I guess for like almost 3 weeks. And it's funny, we played with pretty much every band who was on the Crass label, but we never played with Crass.
You never played with Crass?
We never did a show with Crass, but we went to see them, so we knew them from the point of view as, oh, they're doing a show, and they'd always talk to the audience members and everything. So we probably had conversations with them, especially, when we did that tour, it was before we were on One Little Indian. So it was really interesting to meet someone from Crass, because we had this, ideas about them, and I guess, and she knew who we were and everything, and she was really cool. And her son, she was on tour with her son who was playing bass, and she was doing like spoken word singing over the top of his bass playing, and they were really cool people. And I guess we kind of understood more about each other from that experience, because there's this whole mythology about how Crass lived in Dial House or whatever, and the same thing about Chumbawamba, and we had kind of a few things in common around that, and they had it much more, because people would go to Dial House and like camp out and and like show up on the doorstep, and we had that a little bit, but nothing like what Crass had.
And next question is from Camille. This is my friend Camille. I got his book, Three Dead Princes, like way back when he did a solo show. Has he written more or have book in the works?
It's funny. So that's the book. When I was doing the book tour 10 years ago, that's the book that came out. And I have probably maybe three other books that I've started, but I've never finished. And in those 10 years, I've done 3 albums. It's always easier for me to write songs and make an album. And I've also written a couple of plays which are not published. So that's kind of like writing a book, writing a play. And we put those plays on with the high school students. I wrote the plays with the students' input. But I do really want to. So this new album, Mesmerica, Expect a Circus, it's actually based partly on one of the plays, but partly on one of the books I'm working on. So he has these fictional threads going through it, but I really want to write that. But I really want to, I'm thinking, oh well, COVID-19, I'm at home all day. I only work part-time, 20 hours a week, but I'm not working, so I have all this time. My kids are grown up, and why am I not writing the book? Well, I'm trying to, get this record out, and so that's my main focus at the moment. But once that's done, hopefully, and especially if this stay at home goes on, I'll get back to writing.
Okay, next one is from Thomas D. Hart. You are clearly influenced by Peter Kropotkin in writing Three Dead Princes. What other anarchist or anarchist idea aside from Kropotkin's and his idea of mutual aid have influenced you? Has Marx or any Marxist idea influenced you?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Marx, I'm kind of like you. I haven't read all those intellectual books. I've read Noam Chomsky, and I'm always, if I see Noam Chomsky on YouTube, he's been talking about what's going on at the moment, I'll always kind of check that out. Uh, but
Okay.
yeah, yeah, and I have read some anarchist books in my time, but that my thing has always been that it has to be accessible to people. I don't think, I'm not trying to convert everyone to anarchism. I don't think everyone will, but I think anarchists are part of the conversation. Anarchism is, and especially the mutual aid thing. And living here, like I said, we have wildfires, and even now, there's an instinct towards mutual aid when there's an emergency going on, and it happened around here when we had wildfires. We last year we didn't really have them, but the previous 4 years we had really serious, getting evacuated or not being able to go out because the smoke was so bad. And but people, kind of your neighbors, even though you might not agree with them politically, you're all in the same boat. And it's kind of the same with this pandemic at the moment. So it kind of is a good thing to try and help each other out, and that's basically mutual aid. And a lot of people kind of lean to that instinctively, though they would never call it anarchism. And the opposite of that, like I said earlier, the capitalism is, it's every man for himself, and yeah, you gotta have your AK-47s to defend your property bullshit. I think we're absolutely screwed if we don't have mutual aid, especially with what's coming down the pipe in terms of climate change. So my anarchist influence, it's part of who I am, I think. And I don't necessarily dig that deep into the anymore, or occasionally, like when I was writing that book, I read mutual aid again, and I was shocked by how relevant it was to me, to my way of thinking. So there's good stuff to find out there, and I encourage people to do it. But I think it has to be applicable to what's going on now for it to have any real meaning. Yeah.
Next one is from Genghis Mingus. What do you play in Edinburgh now the venue has closed? Maybe the person thinks you still live in England. I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, when we did the tour in England last year, and we didn't play in Scotland, that's the first time I'd done a tour in England for 10 years, over 10 years. So we do, we have some tours booked for but in the US, and going over to the Rebellion Festival in England in August, but I don't know if they're going to happen, with what's going on. They haven't cancelled them yet, but June and July and August, they might not happen. So
next question is from Brandon Lovecraft. He's a friend of mine. He plays in a band called Headdress. That's a peace punk band from Southern California. His question is, I've always heard that the idea behind releasing the album Top Thumper was to help DIY causes and labels such as Crass Records. Is there any truth to that rumor?
Just say that again, the question.
Okay. I've always heard that the idea behind releasing the album Top Thumper was to help support DIY causes and labels such as Crass Records. Is there any truth to that rumor?
Not specifically. We just set out to make an album, which when we did an album, Chumbawamba, we always kind of sat down before we wrote lyrics or whatever, and we think, what kind of theme do we? Because we always tried to have a theme to each album, and the theme to Top Thumper was basically, ordinary people living ordinary lives in Northern England. And when we wrote the songs, we weren't on a major label. We were still on One Little Indian, so we weren't thinking, oh, this is gonna, help these people or those people. We always, even though we were a full-time touring band, we would still do some benefit shows. So we were always, in contact with, groups who needed money or raising awareness about whatever struggle they were involved in. But there was no connection to Crass at that point, I don't think.
Next one is from Dory. Dory from Los Angeles. He's a friend of mine also. What was it like being the only anarchist band to get world famous? What was it like to get famous?
Well, that's interesting because we had, there were bands who we respected and who played with, and they weren't necessarily like anarcho punk bands. So, for instance, like in England, Mekons or the X in Holland or Fugazi, who,
The X.
Fugazi, the X, yeah. And they, those bands, well, especially the X and Fugazi were very DIY. So what and we knew them and we'd played shows with them and been on tour with them and everything. So when we signed with a major, they were like really kind of curious and kind of like, well, that's not how we would do it, but we're kind of interested to see how it works out. And it was an experiment for us. We'd no idea really. I mean, we were right in the fact that we'd last a couple of years, and then the way Chumbawamba was politically would never last very long in that world. And we were right about that. But yeah, it was interesting. And I think that was part of the appeal of doing it. We're like, because we'd been through that whole cycle of, having a cassette label, doing 7-inch vinyl, having our own label, slightly bigger indie label, and then a bigger indie label like One Little Indian. And we're like, okay, well, let's try this and see what we can do with it. Basically, we did have that idea in mind. Well, look, this is a whole new, and it was a shock to us they even wanted us, because the record company in England, EMI, there's no way they would have signed us, and it was the EMI in Germany who signed us. So we were signed to an American company and a German company, and the English company had to take orders from Germany, which they hated. But we kind of got under the radar because in England we were so known for being political anarchos that, even though the BBC would occasionally play one of the songs, we were never part of the establishment there. So it was kind of interesting to explore that world in a way. And I think you're right. Asking the question, no other bands had kind of gone that route really before, and the bands who did have some credibility or something to say kind of got swallowed up and just became part of it, or they broke up. That machine is so ruthless that you can see why a lot of bands don't survive it financially, for one, because a lot of them end up bankrupt. And emotionally or whatever.
Cool. Next one is from Brandon Martin. What was the writing process like where pictures of starving children still sell records?
So that was interesting because, I kind of hinted at this earlier. We had written, we were a touring, well, we played a lot of shows in England. I won't say we were a touring band in those days, and so we had like an album's worth of songs we wanted to record, and we were supposed to record this album with what was Flux of Pink Indians label called?
Before One
Little Indian? We were going to do an album with them before, when they were still in the anarcho punk days, and for some reason I can't remember why it didn't work out. And in the meantime, the whole Live Aid thing happened, and we're like, shit, we have to. There's a lot of bullshit going on here, and everyone's pretending this is a great thing. But if you actually read anything about the history of Africa and how colonialism and slavery basically exploited and is still exploiting Africa, that's why there's famine, and throwing charity at it's not going to solve the problem. So basically we had all these songs and we rewrote the lyrics. So it became this concept album, which was pictures of starving children. But we kind of had the change. So it was interesting in that way. And we did that, on some later songs, we'd have the song and then just something would happen we wanted to write about, and we'd just change the lyrics, So we, our songs evolved kind of in some ways in response to what was happening in the world. And you know, when you make a record, it can take like 6 months from when you record it to when it comes out, and you're kind of always juggling with that if you're trying to respond to things, if you're trying to write about things that matter rather than just what most bands write about.
Okay, we got two more from the Facebook post, and we got two
Okay.
from Instagram. Okay, this one's from Facebook. Atana PV. Ask him what was it like being in a group as famous as Chumbawamba and attending huge events, but still, I'm assuming, holding anarchist ideologies.
So yeah, especially like I said, when we were, you know, in that total mainstream, you know, being on TV in America. Like, you know, we were on David Letterman, and you know, we did the whole Mumia thing. But the week after, the record company guy came and he says, "Oh, look, here's how many albums you've sold because you're on Letterman." And he had the numbers on a piece of paper, and it's like, I don't know, 175,000 albums in a week, which is more than we'd sold in the whole of our 15 years with, like, you know, 7 albums before. So it's an insane world. But, you know, like I said, we were a bit older, so we were a bit more cynical maybe, or just, you know, so when, you know, like you're on some TV show and there's some famous actors or whatever, and they seem like friendly enough people, but it's very easy to, I mean, we were never abandoned. So, you know, there's this mythology about, you know, rock stars hanging out backstage. And we played these radio festivals in the US where, you know, we played with, like, you know, Aerosmith and Backstreet Boys. And this is like, we were just like, this is just insanity. Why are we at this event where there's these like super, you know, rock people, you know, and it just seemed, very quite shallow. And occasionally you'd meet somebody who you think actually they're really cool, and you'd have a conversation about music or whatever, or politics. But mostly, and I mean, you don't really have time to get to know anyone in like an afternoon when you're hanging out at a festival, but we didn't really have much in common with a lot of the people in that world. And it's true, because, you know, that world is kind of like, it's like the class system, and those people are the rich people. The people who stay in that world are there because they make shitloads of money and they compromise on everything, and they just want to be they probably don't admit that, but they're just like a product with no substance. And we always had substance throughout. We're always like, oh, well, yeah, we're on this TV show, can we use that platform? Or, you know, we just play the song or whatever. Or we were on like The View, and they asked us about anarchism on daytime TV in the United States, you know, mainstream daytime TV. And like, you think, well, that's, at least that's cool, you know. Barbara Walters asking a question about anarchism at Chumbawamba, and whether that is watered down, diluted anarchism, or maybe some kid sees that and thinks, oh yeah, I kind of, you know. And we get, you know, well, emails I guess now, but letters and from kids, because we were inspired by Sex Pistols. You know, we were like inspired. Yeah, I didn't know what anarchism was till I'd heard who the Sex Pistols were. So maybe, you know, being in the mainstream for a little bit, we did affect some people. You know, we enlightened them in some ways, maybe.
I'm still reading stuff on the Facebook. Okay, post.
Okay.
Last date from David Insurrection. I have 2 questions. Slap represent a radical departure from the band's punk beginnings. Was this a deliberate move in terms of distancing yourself from the scene, or was that shift more organic? Was it down to what you listening to at the time? Do you remember playing at Cremon Island as a solo performer?
Where was the venue? The last one, sorry.
Oh,
Playing where?
Cremon Island as a solo performer.
Oh yeah, I do actually. Yeah, I played a lot of. Well, I won't say a lot, but a few solo shows in Scotland. Cramond Island was one, and I think it was like a little kind of mini punk rock festival. And it, you know, that scene, I I've never really come across it. I mean, there's in the Northwest now. There's kind of like an acoustic punk riot for scene, and in Denver, I played a festival, Compost Festival, last year. So there is a younger generation of kind of anarcho punks, for want of a better description. But it's very much more diverse musically than the old English punk scene. And we weren't, we played with a lot of those anarcho punk bands in England. And, some of them we got on with good, and we did more shows with them, and others you just play one show and you don't really get to know each other or whatever. But we were always kind of challenging ourselves. So I guess where Chumbawamba mutated musically, especially, and I think it's because we had women in the band as well, that changed the dynamic from just like loud, angry punk rock. Not that women can't be loud and angry and play guitars and everything, but just the balance of the people who were in Chumbawamba, we kind of pushed each other as a group of friends, really, to push the boundaries of what we could do with music. And I think we kind of kept that the whole way through, and we always tried to do that. And maybe that's another reason why we lasted so long, because we were always trying to think of some new way of putting the ideas over.
Okay. Danbert, I have to stand up because I have my other phone up here for my Instagram. This is getting live.
Okay.
This one is IOS and Design. What was it like to be known for a party song when your platform was experimental? That was a question.
Oh, say again. Sorry.
The
sound's a little bit distorted.
It's from what was it like to be known for a party song when your platform was experimental?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's an interesting one, because for us it was just like one of the songs on the album, because we always viewed things in terms of like a whole album. And we knew it was like, when we played it live before the record came out, and it was only a few times, we knew it was like an upbeat song. And we had other songs like that, like Mouthful of Shit or I Never Gave Up, where you just knew the audience wanted to get into it and dance to it or whatever, or sing along. And we knew it was one of those songs. But we'd no idea it was going to turn into this huge thing. So it was kind of interesting, and I mean, it still is. We're classed in the mainstream as a one-hit wonder because of that one song, and it's kind of bizarre to see the amount of, even now today, like somebody today said, "Oh, I heard you on NPR today," and like she wrote me a message, and or just where I live in this small town, people go, "Oh, you're that guy from that band," and they can't remember the name of the band, but "Oh, what was the song?" And then I say the words, and "Oh, I remember, yeah," and it played at the football game or whatever, and it's just kind of fascinating to me and to us, really, that something we did is part of popular culture. And then a guy wrote me last week and he said, "Oh, do you know your song was in an episode of Kimmy Schmidt on," I've never seen Kimmy Schmidt, whatever, but and it wasn't the song, it was, they were just talking at the actors, the characters were talking about Chumbawamba, and I guess the people who wrote the script, they heard the album back in the day or whatever, and oh, there's a clever little line or joke or whatever. So it's just kind of interesting in that, you write a song and you put it out there, and once you put it out there, you can't really control how people respond to it. And that's part of art, any kind of art. You put it out there, and there's always going to be somebody who interprets it in a different way. And it obviously became a big party song, and just way, way beyond any control we could have over how people took it. But it's kind of a double-edged thing, really. Cool in some ways, And it's like we were so much more than a one-hit wonder, you know. So there's both sides to it.
Danbert, are we gonna ever see the Chumbawamba documentary? What is going on with that?
I don't know. So Dunstan, who's making it, I know he had like a lot of personal upheavals once he'd started making it, and I think his problem was, you know, and like he, you know, when I was in England a couple of times, we all got together and did film some footage, you know, interviews, questions, and so he did a lot of work on it, but I don't know exactly where he's at with it now. And I think his problem was, you know, most documentaries you see about bands, it's like you were saying earlier, they're the interest for the audience is because the band members, they hate each other, or they're the drama, you know, there's drama. But we were never like that. We always liked each other. We're still all friends. You know, when I go to England, I go hang out and stay at, you know, Boff's house or Lou and Harry's house or Alice's or whatever. And there's no like immediate drama for the story. And he struggled with a narrative for the film. But yeah, to be honest, I'm sorry. I should find out because I don't really know where he's at with it.
Danbert, I have to say, just to think everything about Chumbawamba and the work side project you do, your band and your acoustic and the theatrical, it's very, very different. It's awesome, amazing. Like it's like evolving to all this different thing. Because some people like do the same thing over and over, but it's really awesome. Your life and everything. You just went to the whole different direction. It's just hard to explain in words, but I just want all I'm saying is no matter what you do in life, sometimes people will get jealous of you, or if you do something different, old fans will get mad at you because it's different. But I just like that about you. You always do stuff that's really different. That's so special about all the stuff you do.
Yeah, that it comes over, because that's what we were trying to do. We're always, you know, the bands that inspired us did that. You know, I mean, even the Beatles, they always tried, each album, they tried to make it different to the one before, and we grew up with that. So it kind of became part of how we approached making art. That you gotta make it interesting for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully it's interesting for whoever, rather than just churning out the same thing. I mean, that's why we didn't survive in the mainstream, because the record companies, they just wanted a carbon copy of the big song, and we didn't give them that. We did something different, and they didn't know what to do, and they couldn't.
Yeah, and also a lot of respect for you for keeping your radical belief and not getting out of all the stuff you're still into, your ideas and anarchism and the whole animal rights and everything. A lot of respect for you, Danbert, for still having all that belief. Thank you. Wow, this is a pretty long interview. Thank you very much for this interview. Tomorrow, I'm going to upload it on YouTube. And sorry, the first 15 minutes of our interview got cut off because I got too excited. I forgot to press record.
Oh, don't worry. I would just get warmed up then anyway.
Yes, but thank you very much, and stay safe.
You and, too, yeah. Take care. Good to see you again for 10 years. Yeah.
And I'm gonna listen to the rest of the stuff, but for some reason it won't let me download on the my iPhone, so I have to do it on the PC computer.
Oh, okay. I don't know why that is. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Things open up, we'll get down to LA again and play, but yeah, we'll see about that. Maybe next year now, but
yes. I'm in Northern California, by the way. I haven't lived in LA for 6 years.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
We're planning on it. Someday we're gonna go back.
My daughter goes to school in LA. She's not there now. She got sent to home, but so yeah, I have an ulterior motive to get to California, but yeah. Cool. Right. Well, thanks so much, Jaylee. Appreciate it.
All right, bye, Danbert.
You take care. Have a good evening. Yeah. Bye. Bye.